Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Giving the presentation this evening will be our club historian, David Mostardi. In the last time he talked, which was 2 years ago, he gave a presentation about the history of the club. This is really the history of Berkeley and how Berkeley was important in that time and its formative years. So without further ado, I'll introduce my husband, David Mostardi.
Thank you, Arlene, for that kind introduction. So it is a pleasure to see you all here during the club on our birthday week. This coming Friday, the 5th of October, is the 120th anniversary of the very first Hillside Club meeting. And so because that happened in 1898, I wanted to talk about 1898. So let's take a look at Berkeley about 1898. So here's the university here. It's looking very grand with its two big buildings. And there's a garden over here and drilling grounds. There's a gymnasium. There's a library. You see there are lots of houses here in this area between Telegraph and Grove, what's now MLK. There are some more houses here. This is the Ocean View industrial area down here. But there are lots of green space in the middle, what used to be farms, where still were farms at the time. And there's this whole area here, which is where all the dormitories are at Cal right now, just a big green empty space. But our story takes place a few blocks over to the right. So this is ground zero for the Hillside Club. This is the north side area, and this photograph was taken in 1898, the year the club was founded. And what I'd like you to do is to focus on this building right here. And if you look carefully, you can see the stepped gables right here, the Cape Dutch stepped gables. This building was where the very first meeting of the Hillside Club happened 120 years ago this Friday. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this very day this photograph was taken, that was the day that meeting was happening. I have no evidence whatsoever for that claim, but we're going to say the day this little boy was gambling about in the hills, that was the day, right now, that meeting is happening in this building that was called the most beautiful building in all of Berkeley. And here is the most beautiful building in Berkeley. It was the house of Volney Moody, and he gave it a Dutch name, Veldvreden. I don't know how the Moody's pronounced this word because they weren't Dutch, but in Dutch they say Veldvreden, which means well satisfied. It was a common name for houses back then. And this building was so beautiful they made postcards of it. So you see, this is a postcard of this building. Sad to say this building does not look like this today. This is how it looks today. Yeah, I know, it's very sad. It is a long story. I won't go into the story, but this building is at the corner of Leroy and LeConte, so just up here a couple of blocks. And the woman who got the club started in 1898, her name was Margaret Robinson, Madge to her friends. She was married to the photographer Oscar Maurer, and she was in a perfect position to start the Hillside Club. She was wealthy, she was smart. She also had a weakness for really fancy hats, like the one you see here. All the pictures of Madge Robinson have her wearing hats like this. And she was very, very well socially connected. And Madge, as Arlene intimated, Madge and her cohorts had a mission. And I'm going to tell you that mission a little later because I'm getting ahead of myself. So I told you we're going to talk about 1898. So let's take a look at 1898. So here is 1898 riding in on her pretty bicycle, and posies are falling out of her basket while the old, tired old lady 1897 rides away. This is a centerfold from Puck magazine in 1898. If I had to pick one word, my leitmotif for this evening, that word is change. 1898 and the years before and the years after were a time of great social and technological change, and very fast social and technological change. So the first thing to remember about 1898 was a long, long time ago. Now, we're used to thinking of the signing of the Declaration of Independence as ancient history as history gets in the United States. But in 1898, the Declaration of Independence was just as far back in history as 1898 is to us today. The way to think about it is that the Hillside Club is exactly half as old as the United States. So we go back halfway to this very ancient time. So 120 years, that's a long time. In 1898, the American Civil War had just ended 33 years before. So if you were a Californian from somewhere back east, and most Californians back then were transplants from back east, and you were, say, age 50 or a little older, then the American Civil War was a huge thing in your personal life experience. And if you were a man who was age 50 or older in 1898, then you were probably a Civil War veteran. You probably saw combat. And if you were just a little older than that, say if you were about age 70 and you lived here in California, well, you might well have come out for the gold rush, which happened 50 years before that in 1848. Well, that's when gold was discovered. That was another period when change in California happened extraordinarily quickly. Between 1848 and 1853, in just a 5-year span, the non-Native American population of California grew from 2,000 to 300,000 in 5 years. So let's take a look at what was happening around these parts in 1898. So on the 1st of January, New Year's Day, 1898, New York City, which used to be just Manhattan Island here in purple, annexed 4 other counties to create Greater New York City, making it all of a sudden the second largest city in the whole world after London in the UK. Just 2 weeks after that, the French author Émile Zola published J'accuse, in which he accused the French government of anti-Semitism in the Dreyfus Affair. About that same time, H.G. Wells published War of the Worlds, one of my personal favorites when I was a boy, about Martians coming to attack the Earth. And about that same day, the USS Maine sails into Havana Harbor in Cuba. That's the Maine coming into the harbor. And just a few weeks later, on February 15th, the Maine exploded. That's the wreckage down there on the bottom. The explosion was probably caused by a coal fire that ignited the ammunition magazines, but the US press played it up and said, oh no, it was a mine, it was an act of war. And this precipitated the Spanish-American War. A few weeks after that, this woman, whose name was Phoebe Ann Mosey, but better known to you and me by her stage name of Annie Oakley, she wrote a letter to the President of the United States offering the government the services of a company of 50 lady sharpshooters who would bring their own arms and their own ammunition in case war should break out with Spain. War did break out with Spain a few weeks afterwards, but the president did not accept her offer. On July 4th in 1898, the United States annexed the Kingdom of Hawaii. And this photograph is from August, when the Hawaiian flag was lowered at Iolani Palace in Honolulu. Most Hawaiians did not accept the legitimacy of this event. There are still a lot of Hawaiians that don't recognize the legitimacy of that event. Also in June, the Second Convention of Peking was signed, and a 99-year lease was created between the Qing dynasty of China and the United Kingdom, giving the British full jurisdiction over Hong Kong. And in December, Pierre and Marie Curie announced the discovery of the element radium to the French Academy of Sciences. So let's take a look at some names and faces, also in the news. So these were some notable people that died in 1898. So on the left, we have Charles Dodgson, better known as Lewis Carroll, the English writer. And in the middle, that's Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian statesman and the first chancellor of Germany. And on the right, that is Aubrey Beardsley, the English illustrator. So died in 1898. And here are some people that were born in 1898. So clockwise from the upper left, that's George Gershwin, the musician. In the middle, we have the American stage and silent film actress, Dorothy Gish. Then that's Dutch artist M.C. Escher and Belgian artist René Magritte. And then in the lower left, of course, that is Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. Now some political leaders. I'm sure you recognize the man on the left, and I know you recognize him because his face appears on the $500 bill that is in your wallet right now. This, of course, is the President of the United States in 1898. And his name is Calvin. This is not Calvin Coolidge, no. This is William McKinley, President of the United States in 1898. And 3 years later, in 1901, he was shot and killed in Buffalo, New York, succeeded by Teddy Roosevelt. The man in the middle is the Prime Minister of Canada in 1898. That is Wilfrid Laurier. And on the right, rounding out the leaders of North America, that is the President of Mexico, Porfirio Diaz. But none of these men were the most famous world leader in 1898. The most famous world leader was a woman, this woman, Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, Empress of India. Still on the throne in her 61st year. She became queen in 1837. So I will be very, very impressed if you know who this man is. This is the governor of the state of California in 1898. His name is James H. Budd, B-U-D-D. I had never heard of him either. He was the last Democrat to hold the governorship until 1939. And this man was not the mayor of Berkeley, because Berkeley wasn't a city yet, but he was the president of the Berkeley Town Board of Trustees. His name is John Richards. So Berkeley didn't have a mayor until 1909. So in the blurb that I wrote for this talk, you may have seen the blurb, I asked a number of rhetorical questions about Berkeley. And this is one of the questions I asked. So was Berkeley a sleepy little backwater in the shadow of San Francisco, or was it this growing college town with visions, even delusions of grandeur? And the answer, of course, is yes. So let's take a look, and remember I'm talking about change this talk. Let's take a look at how things are changing. So the United States population in 1898, we're going to use the 1900 census because it's convenient. The population of the United States in 1900 was 76 million, a little more. And now, again, the most recent census, 2010, 309 million. So that's a four-fold growth in the country's population in those 110 years. But if we look at how California grew during that time, it's much more drastic. California's population went from 1.5 million to 37 million in those same 110 years. That's a 25-fold increase. It's a whole lot of infrastructure to be building. So now let's go down and look at Berkeley's population. I'm going to give you a few more data points. So in 1880, hardly anybody lived here at all, 2,000 people, and probably most of those were students and faculty at the university. But 10 years later, that population basically tripled. And by 1900, it had tripled again. And by 1910, it had tripled again. And you'll notice Berkeley's population now is basically the same as it was in 1950. We ran out of room. We couldn't really grow anymore. So if we compare Berkeley in 1898 to when Berkeley ran out of room, that's about a 9-fold increase in just 50 years. And if we allow ourselves to compare Berkeley's population to 1880, that's a 60-fold increase. So again, a whole lot of infrastructure to be built in a very short amount of time. Enough with the numbers, let's look at some pictures. So this is Berkeley in 1874. There's nothing here except these two brand new shiny university buildings. This is the bay. This is Mount Tamalpais over here. So we're in the hills looking west. This is Albany Hill. Okay, this is South Hall, this is North Hall. So this is Strawberry Creek here. This is the same view in the same year, 1874. You can't see San Francisco's about over here right now, okay? So we're looking basically out, this is where the Golden Gate would be if we could see the Golden Gate. So these two buildings, this is South Hall. South Hall still exists, the oldest building on campus and probably the third oldest building in the city of Berkeley right now, 1873. North Hall was also built in 1873, but North Hall was torn down in the 1930s. So as you can see, there's nothing here. But this is 1874. This is 1900, so 25 years later. So here's a comparison, the two photos side by side. So we've gone from basically nothing up here. These are farms, actually farms. And the little farms that are left are these little green spaces here. So a whole lot changing very quickly. Another question I asked in my blurb, did people still get around in horses and buggies in 1898? Well, yes, they did. So this is the university looking the other direction, right? So this picture before, we're up in the hills looking down, and now this next picture with the horse and buggies here looking the other way. Horse-drawn carriages were a fact of life in 1898. Now, whether you owned a horse and buggy depended on several things, right? How much money you had, right? How much you needed to get around, whether you lived downtown, maybe you lived next to a streetcar line and you didn't need to have a horse because you could just get on a streetcar and go where you needed to go. Or whether you lived way up in the hills, and we're going to see some pictures of that, and lots of dirt roads up to that house, and so streetcars didn't go there yet, so you probably did have a horse. And so in 1898 and the years before, if you were going out on a nice family outing, you'd probably go like this. And you would be wearing these nice outfits, but these outfits over here that Diane Ayers put out, you'd be wearing something like that. You can see these ladies have very nice hats. So they're out on their carriage on a nice family outing. But 10 or 20 years later, you'd go out on that outing like this. You'd still wear a nice outfit, but you'd take the car. A lot of people didn't have cars or horses because cars and horses were expensive. Now, on a nice day, carrying this basket around maybe isn't so bad. On a cold winter day when it's raining, it's a different story. Again, at a time of huge social and technological change, but there were, in 1898, there were whole industries built up around the horse. So first thing, your horse had to eat, and so you had to buy hay and grain for your horse. So you went to businesses like this to get coal, you'd get food for your horse, and you'd probably get coal while you're at it because you needed to heat your house. Your horse needed a place to live, so you had a stable. Sometimes your horse got sick, so you needed a large animal veterinarian. You had a wagon and a carriage for your horse to pull, and so there were men to build your wagon and to fix your wagon and to paint your wagon. There were blacksmiths to shoe your horse and to repair the metal pieces of your carriage and your wagon when they broke. And in the years between 1895 and 1915, all of this just disappeared. All of these men, and they were mostly men, they were all out of work, all to be replaced by the horseless carriage, gas stations, mechanics. Now, what would we call this today? The slang word today is disruption. So if you were a blacksmith, yeah, you were being disrupted. But disruption is just a fancy word for competition. Cars were competing against the horses, and the cars won. Were the streets even paved? So let's go back to our comparison between Old Berkeley and New Berkeley. It's hard enough up here even to see a street, It's just fields. Now, there were streets here. The main streets that were running north-south, so they were hidden by these trees, but they're down here. I mean, there was a downtown Berkeley. And now you can see a lot more streets here. This is probably University here, this thick street. So whether the street was paved is going to depend on which street are you talking about and which year are we talking about, because things were changing really quickly. So here's a picture of downtown Berkeley. I love this picture. 1892. This is believe it or not, this is the intersection of Shattuck and University. University is a lot narrower than it, and you can tell the streets are not paved right here because of these wooden sidewalk duck boards here. And the reason for those duck boards are so that when it's raining, you can walk on the wood and you won't get your nice shoes all muddy. And in fact, it's raining right now. It's pouring rain, and you notice that nobody is out in the pouring rain and the mud today. But doesn't this picture look more like the Wild West than the home of the State University of California? And this is 1892. But just a few years later, so this picture just went around the Baja website, so I stole it for his talk. This is a young Cal co-ed, just arrived, it looks like, in town, and she's right downtown at the train station on Shattuck, right around Cedar Street. In fact, these buildings here, this is where the Wells Fargo Tower is at Center and Shattuck. These streets are almost certainly paved at this point, even though we see some horses and carriages there. But let's go back and look at our ground zero north side district of the Hillside Club. This is Hurst Street here, coming up the hill. And this is Ridge Road here. And this is Euclid going sideways. And this is the drill grounds of the university. The North and South Hall are off to the left out of this picture. So those streets look at least graded. Hard to tell if they're paved or not, at least graded. But this dirt road right here, this would eventually become LeConte Street. And this dirt road right here would become Virginia. And this dirt road right here would become Leroy. So clearly some of these streets are in better shape than others. So this is a close-up here. I want to focus, let's just, for example, we'll focus on this house right here. This house is at the corner of Dirt Road and Dirt Road. Okay, it's at the corner of Virginia and Leroy. So it's just dirt road. So if it rains, it's muddy. And if it's wintertime, it's dark and it's muddy. This is why people had horses and wagons. Now, this was the up-and-coming desirable neighborhood. You know, lots of faculty and other university employees wanted to live up here. If we look carefully, we can see evidence of some more modern conveniences. It's hard to see. There are some electrical poles here, telephone poles. There's one here, and there's one here, and there's one here, and there's one here. They're hard to see. So there is some electricity up here, so probably these houses had some electricity, but just for lights, right? There's no such thing as electric refrigerator. You had an icebox. There's no such thing as an electric washing machine. You washed your clothes by hand, or you took them down to the laundry. They would have had indoor plumbing, but at this point, it's going to be on septic. The sewers hadn't come up here yet. And there's probably no underground gas service either, so you probably were either heating your house with wood fires or with coal. But there's electricity. But 1 mile north of here, just 1 mile north of here, it looks like this. Actually, you know this area. This is Spruce. And this rock right here, this is Grotto Rock, which is on Santa Barbara. So Marin, what's now Marin, comes up like this and comes up like here. This little dirt track here is Cragmont, or what would become Cragmont. So we can see that development is probably coming, but right now there's just this one house. This is about where Cragmont School is right now. I promised you a movie. Yay, movie. So now I know some of you have seen this movie before. Some of you have probably seen this movie dozens of times, but I know I'm hoping that some of you haven't seen this movie before. So this is a 3-minute, just 3 minutes long. It's a streetcar ride. We're going to be on a streetcar. We're going to come from downtown Berkeley up to this part of town where the Hillside Club. This is a movie from 1906. So it's called A Trip to Berkeley. Now, a few things about this movie. This movie was filmed in June of 1906. Now, what happened in April of 1906? The earthquake and fire. So San Francisco was almost completely destroyed just 2 months before this. We are going to be on a streetcar. It was the Oakland and Berkeley Rapid Transit Company. And we're going to be on streetcar line number 4. This line was built in 1901. So the 1898 pictures I've been showing you of Northside, that's 3 years before this streetcar line was built. It's a really interesting little movie. Keep this picture in mind. So this is what would become Hearst Avenue. And we are looking east up into the hills. So this is the university over on the right side, and this is the north side area over here where Veltvreden is. Just a couple signs of modern conveniences. There's this one electrical pole and another one, but it's this dirt road. So our streetcar is going to be coming up the same street. It's going to look very different. This is one still from this frame. And amongst other things, you'll notice lots of electrical poles because, amongst other things, we need to be able to run the streetcar. Okay, I'm going to stop this just for a sec. So we are on Oxford Street, looking north. We're right about where Berkeley Way tees into the university. So what's going to happen is 1 block up, we're going to get to Hearst Street, we're going to turn right, we're going to go up all the way to Hearst, and then when we get to Euclid, we're going to turn left. And that's our little 3-minute streetcar journey. This is what it looks like today. Just as, to bring you right into the 20th century. So this is the same view. This is a different streetcar which is going to move in front of us. This man here is going to flip a switch. The streetcar is going to go straight, and as soon as it passes, this man is going to flip the switch so that we turn right instead. You see he's smoking a pipe. I love it. You can see his pipe smoke right now. I just love that. So this streetcar is going north on Oxford. We're turning right onto Hearst. And then we're going to have to look at all the telephone poles. You can't see the wires, but there are lots of wires above there to run. This is University House, where the chancellor lives. That's still there, but you can't see it from this view anymore because there are lots of buildings in the way. I love this picket fence with a nice little gate. And we're going to make this little jog. This is LeConte Street coming down the hill. All these houses burned down in the 1923 fire. And now you probably recognize the divided street of Hearst. Horse and carriage. The cars and horse and carriages you're going to see on the right were also probably hired for this film, I'm going to guess. And this is the cheesiest part of this little movie. There's going to be this staged altercation here. There's not supposed to be anybody walking on the track in front of the car, but they're going to stop the car and they're going to get out and you're going to see this lady in white's going to run over and she's going to whack his head with her parasol. But this is all staged for the camera. Here she comes. Whack, whack, whack. Get off the tracks. Okay, and they all walk off and they get back on the car and we'll go on. But you're going to see here, you're going to see 2 more cars here, and you're going to see 3 more horse-drawn carriages. Yeah, lots of plants here. So that's these carriages were likely all hired as part of the show here. So we're getting up close to Euclid. And we're going to be turning left up Euclid. This is the north gate entrance of campus. I'm just going to stop here for a second just to show you that the street, such that it is, for a street stops at this point. This is not a paved street yet. It's hard to tell exactly what's here, but there are clearly little planted areas that may be just a dirt track, but it's not a fully graded street for cars and carriages yet. And here we are turning on Euclid. And that's the end of our little movie. You saw there were, I think I heard the word orchard, it's very quaint, lots of old houses, fruit trees even right at the corner of. So this line continued up to Hillside Street and stopped. That's where it was. So this line was built in 1901, again 3 years after the pictures we've been looking at. So our streetcar started about here, and we went a block this way, and then we turned right, and we came up Hearst. And this is where that silly altercation was. And we came up here to Euclid, and we turned left and came up to about here. And the streetcar continued along. Hillside is about right here, just out off frame. And that's where the streetcar line stopped. But by 1906, there would be a lot more houses in this picture. If we had the same picture in 1906, we would have seen a lot more development, a lot more evidence of modern life. Well, back at the beginning, I was talking about Madge Robinson and her cohorts and why they started the club. And I told you they had a mission. And their mission concerned stupid white painted boxes. This is actually a quote not from Madge Robinson, but from Charles Keeler about houses. And Charles Keeler will be talking about him a lot in the next few minutes. He was another mover and shaker at the time. He was probably involved in starting the club, or at least encouraging the ladies to start the Hillside Club in 1898. But whenever Charles Keeler, who worked in San Francisco, or Madge Robinson on her trips, went to San Francisco, they saw scenes like this. This is a hillside in San Francisco. A steep street with Victorian houses. Madge and Charles had definite opinions about Victorian houses on San Francisco streets. They did not like them. And that's why Keeler called them stupid white painted boxes. Madge Robinson's mission in life for the Hillside Club was to prevent the Berkeley Hills from ending up looking like the San Francisco Hills. San Francisco had a regular square street grid, and they just laid that grid down on top of San Francisco, and if there happened to be a hill in the way, you just went up the hill, come hell or high water. They didn't think that Berkeley should look like this. They thought Berkeley should look like this. And if anybody knows where this picture was taken, please come see me afterwards. And they thought Berkeley should look like this. And like this. And they thought that houses should look more like this. This is Charles Keeler's own house. It was built by Bernard Maybeck in 1895 up at Highland Place at the top of Ridge Road. And there were a little clutch of houses that kind of looked like that. All built in the late 1890s. This picture probably dates from a little later than that just because of the electricity, and this is Ridge Road here, and at the top there, that's Highland Place. Madge Robinson and her friends were successful, the early Hillside Club was successful in getting the Berkeley Hills to look more like this. They got policies instigated so when the hills were developed, instead of a street grid, a square street grid, the streets curved around the contours of the hill. And if there was a tree in the way, you went around the tree. And if there were big rocks in the way, you went around the rocks. So if we go back to that picture of Cragmont and Marin and Spruce, they could have just put a square street grid here, but they didn't. You see Cragmont goes like this, and then it goes like this, and then it goes like this, and Spruce is curving around. They wanted the nature to be apparent. You went around these trees. There's a big rock outcropping up here, too. You went around that. So there's another big social trend that was happening at the same time. Arlene touched on this in her introduction. And this was something that influenced the club's rhetoric, and it influenced how people built houses and how the neighborhoods were formed. And it was the emerging environmental movement, although people didn't call it environmentalism at the time. But it was a big thing. So this is Charles Keeler here, and he was a social butterfly too. He loved hobnobbing with really famous people, and these are some really famous people. So this is John Muir, who founded the Sierra Club in 1892, and this is John Burroughs, who was also an environmental activist. This is William Keith, the painter, and this is Francis Brown. But what did you do in the early Sierra Club, and when you were hanging out with people like John Muir and William Keith and John Burroughs? You went hiking up in the mountains. That's what you did. You went and visited redwood trees. Some of you may recognize this man. He was also an important figure in the early environmental movement around here. This is Duncan McDuffie, whose name still lives on as part of Mason McDuffie Real Estate. Duncan McDuffie was a real estate developer, but he was also president of the Sierra Club on 2 different occasions in his early years. And he was also one of the founders of the East Bay Regional Park System. Important man in all of this. And of course, there was the environmental president, outdoorsman himself, Teddy Roosevelt. You remember he got to be president because William McKinley was shot and killed. And this famous picture at Glacier Point in Yosemite. The Hillside Club really drank all this up. They thought it was really important stuff. So the first important social thing that the Hillside Club did, in addition to putting pressure on the city to develop the hills in the way I've described, they built Old Hillside School. This is not the existing Old Hillside School that's up on Nut Hill. This is the old Hillside School. It was built in 1901, and there were rooms on the inside, but also this wonderful big porch. And that way, you could have classes on the inside, and you could have classes on the outside. Fresh air, exercise, does a body good. If we go back to our house that we were looking at here, at the corner of Dirt Path and Dirt Path, the Old Hillside School was right here, at the corner of Virginia and Leroy. Unfortunately, it all, as you know, this whole area burned down in 1923, including Old Hillside School, and including the original Hillside Clubhouse. In 1904, Charles Keeler wrote a book called The Simple Home, because it wasn't enough just that you said what a house shouldn't be. So, okay, a house shouldn't be a stupid white painted box, but we had to say what a house was, and so Charles Keeler wrote this book. This is what The Simple Home is all about. And the first chapter in this book isn't about the house. The first chapter is about the garden. Now you might expect in a typical book about a house, the garden would be the last chapter. Nuh-uh. Garden is the first chapter because that's the most important thing. Fresh air, sunshine. A couple of years later in 1906, our Hillside Club put out this pamphlet about guidelines on building your house. This way you just have this little pamphlet instead of reading Charles Keeler's whole book. There's no byline on this pamphlet, but it was written by Bernard and Annie Maybeck. And it's where we get our famous line that hillside architecture is landscape gardening around a few rooms for use in case of rain. So what is your house? Your house is just some place where you don't get rained on. But down here, they also say, choose a wide lot for your house. Do without something else, but don't come 15 miles and climb 600 feet to live on a slice of land next to your neighbor's fence. Now, when Maybeck is talking about coming 15 miles, he's talking about coming from San Francisco, because in 1906, what had just happened to San Francisco? It all burned down. there were one of the reasons Berkeley's population tripled in between 1900 and 1910 is that lots of people came to Berkeley. They got burned out of San Francisco, didn't want to have that happen again, and so they came to live in Berkeley. And climbing 600 feet means coming and living up in the hills. A few rooms in case of rain. So, did you sleep outside too? Damn straight you did. You slept in your sleeping porch because that's what your house has, a sleeping porch. And lots of arts and crafts houses from this time were built with sleeping porches. This is Bernard Maybeck's own house. This also burned down in 1923. And I think there were, if I remember correctly, there were 4 different sleeping porches in this house. There's one up here, and there's one here. There's probably somewhere around the back. So, what do you need a bedroom for? You put your mattress out here, you sleep. Fresh air. It's good for you. But fundamentally, what did people build clubs for, neighborhood clubs? They built it for community. They wanted to build a neighborhood. So this is the old Hillside Clubhouse. It was right here where you're sitting now. Again, burned down in 1923. The club first met at Veldvreden, the Moody's house just up the hill you saw. They met there until 1901, and then when they built Hillside School, the Hillside Club met at the schoolhouse. And then when they built this, then they started meeting here. They had dinners, they had dances, music, good food, good drink. You built a community. And the idea was, the neighborhood was still growing, right? At the beginning, not many people lived here, but more and more came as, every week there were more people coming to live. It gets dark early in the wintertime. After dinner, but before bedtime, what are you going to do? You need to entertain yourself. You come down to the club. The early Hillsiders were really big into stage productions. So this is the earliest known photograph of a Hillside Club stage production. It's one of the early Christmas ceremonials. It's as good a quality picture as I can find. So this was sometime between early 1920s. There was a fireplace with a fire you could come sit next to. Your neighborhood club wasn't necessarily always without a little side interest. Here's Madge Robinson again. And this is the San Francisco Call newspaper. Let's see, this is also 1906, October of 1906. And rather snobbily titled, News of the Counties Bordering San Francisco Bay. But why is Madge there with her big hat? Well, because strife besets fashionable Berkeley. Oh my goodness. A row has developed between factions of the fashionable Hillside Club over the invasion of portable houses, and disruption of the club is imminent. I'm sure the society ladies of San Francisco had great fun reading about Madge Robinson and getting a little comeuppance. Old money always looks down its nose at new money, and we're just a sleepy little backwater in the shadow of San Francisco, after all. But it's okay, the Hillside Club survived. The disruption of the club was not imminent. And there was even time for Madge and her husband, this is actually Madge and her husband and 2 friends, going off to the big game. You can see their Cal Go Bears pennants on their car, and here, people, they put those Warriors flags on their cars they're driving around. People did that 100 years ago. Picnics, the big game, go Bears. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our little tour of 1898. If you would like more information, 2 books in particular I'd recommend. Berkeley 1900 by Richard Schwartz. A number of the pictures that you saw in this talk I stole from his book. And the other book is called Berkeley Bohemia. Now this talks about the early Hillside Club, goes a little later into the early 20th century, but it's great stories about community and the early part of Berkeley. So I'll just close that if you are new to the club, Please stay for dessert. As Arlene said, we've got chocolate, strong hot chocolate and cookies. Please, if you see someone wearing a white name tag, they're a member here at the club, please talk. I hope you'll find that the 2018 version of the Hillside Club can offer you some community and some fresh air. So, thank you very much. It'll just take a few minutes for a couple of questions. Christine. That's an excellent question. Does this building have the same exact floor plan as the original clubhouse? No, it doesn't. The fireplace was up here, and that was moved over to here. So this picture is also the picture on, as you exit the building, is on the left. So if I'm not mistaken, this picture was taken from back there, this way. There wasn't a stage like this. As you saw that, there wasn't really a stage. They had to make do with just this little area up on top of a few steps. But no, it didn't really have the same. And one of the things they did, because they were such into dramatic productions, they made sure that the new clubhouse had a stage. Yeah, and so that's one reason the hearth was put off to the side. There are early pictures of this building. There's one, the earliest one I know of is from about 1928, 1930, but it looks just like this. The early pictures of this building don't look any different from modern pictures of this building. Yes.
Thank you again to all the volunteers and to our speaker, our club historian, David Mostardi.
Thank you.